Somebody wants to own a fast food franchise. Buy the brand, follow the manual, and let decades of national advertising bring customers straight to the door. It sounds like the safest version of business ownership a person could choose. No need to invent a menu, build a brand from nothing, or convince anyone the food is worth trying. Drive past any drive-thru at lunchtime and the line wraps around the building, cars idling bumper to bumper, the parking lot full, the menu board glowing. It looks like a business that runs itself. More cars, more orders, more money. Here is the problem. That lunchtime line is the 1 hour of the day that hides almost everything that actually determines whether this business makes money. The truth is, a fast food franchise is not really a restaurant business. It is a real estate and royalty business wearing a familiar uniform. And once that distinction is understood, everything about how a franchise location actually makes money and how it quietly fails to starts to make sense. Before getting into what can go wrong, it helps to understand what is actually being purchased when someone buys a franchise, because it is not a business in the way most people imagine. It is a license, a long-term contractual relationship with a parent company that dictates almost every operational detail in exchange for the use of a recognized name. There isn't one tier of franchise either. At the entry level sit smaller regional chains and newer growing brands, where the upfront franchise fee might run $20,000 to $50,000 and total investment to open a single location can land anywhere from $300,000 to just over $1 million. In the middle sit the well-known mid-sized national chains, where franchise fees commonly run $30,000 to $75,000 and total opening investment, including construction, equipment, and initial inventory, frequently lands between $1 and $2 million. At the top sit the largest, most recognized global brands, the ones with the most powerful advertising engines and the most demanding standards, where the franchise fee alone can exceed $50,000 and total investment for a single restaurant, including real estate, can climb well past $2 million, sometimes considerably higher in premium locations. Each tier is really a different trade-off between brand power and cost. A bigger name brings more built-in customer trust and a stronger national marketing engine. But it also brings a steeper price of entry and a stricter set of rules about exactly how the business must be run. The first surprise for most new franchisees is that most parent companies do not simply take a franchise fee and disappear. They typically require candidates to have a minimum net worth and a minimum amount of liquid, unencumbered capital before they will even consider approving an application, often several $100,000 in liquid capital and a net worth well beyond that, regardless of how strong a specific location's potential looks on paper. This requirement exists for a structural reason that becomes clear only after opening. The franchisor is not simply selling a brand. It is selling a business relationship it expects to last 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, and it wants confidence the franchisee has enough of a financial cushion to survive the inevitable rough early months without collapsing and defaulting on lease and equipment obligations that, in many cases, the parent company itself has guaranteed or co-signed. Now come the fees themselves, and this is where the naive mental model of franchising breaks down fastest. The image in most people's heads is a single upfront payment, and then the business simply belongs to them. The financial reality is a permanent, ongoing revenue-sharing arrangement that never ends for as long as the franchise agreement is in effect. Almost every franchise system charges an ongoing royalty, typically calculated as a percentage of gross sales rather than profit, commonly landing somewhere between 4 and 8% of every single dollar that comes through the register, regardless of whether that location is having a profitable month or a losing one. On top of the royalty sits a separate advertising fund contribution, usually another 2 to 5% of gross sales, pooled across every location in the system to fund the national marketing campaigns that make the brand recognizable in the first place. Stack those together, and a franchisee is routinely handing over somewhere between 6 and 13% of total revenue before covering a single dollar of rent, labor, food cost, or utilities. This is the single most important structural fact in the entire business. And it is worth pausing on the way it is worth pausing on in any royalty-based model. The parent company gets paid on revenue, not on profit, which means the franchisor's incentives and the franchisee's incentives are not always perfectly aligned. A location can be barely breaking even or even losing money, and the parent company is still collecting its percentage of every transaction. Every single week, without exception, real estate is the next layer. And for fast food specifically, it behaves differently than in almost any other retail category, because the physical site itself is treated as a strategic asset rather than a simple rented box. Many major franchisors, particularly the largest and most established chains, actually own or control the underlying real estate and lease it back to the franchisee, sometimes at a percentage of gross sales rather than a flat monthly rent. A structure that means the parent company profits from both the royalty on sales and the rent on the building itself. This dual revenue stream for the franchisor is one of the most quietly lucrative aspects of the entire fast food business model. And it means the franchisor's financial health can remain strong even during periods when many individual franchisees are struggling. A location site has to be chosen with extreme discipline, because unlike an independent restaurant that might survive on loyal, repeat customers even in a mediocre location, a franchise depends heavily on visibility and drive-through accessibility along a high-traffic corridor. Sites need enough frontage for signage that can be seen well in advance by drivers, enough depth to accommodate a stacking lane for the drive-through that can hold 10, 15, sometimes 20 cars without backing up onto the street, and proximity to daytime population density, office clusters, schools, or residential neighborhoods, that can sustain both a lunch rush and a dinner rush. Getting this wrong is one of the most common reasons a franchise location underperforms even when the brand itself is thriving nationally. Construction and equipment costs come next, and fast food kitchens are considerably more specialized and more expensive to build out than most first-time owners expect. A commercial kitchen has to be engineered around a specific, standardized workflow dictated by the franchisor down to exact equipment placement. Because consistency across every location in the system is the entire foundation of the brand promise. Fryers, grills, specialized ovens, walk-in coolers and freezers, drive-through ordering and payment systems, and point-of-sale technology that has to integrate with the franchisor's centralized reporting. Systems can together cost anywhere from $200,000 to over $600,000, depending on the brand and the size of the kitchen. And critically, franchisees are almost never free to shop around for cheaper equipment or a different layout. Most franchise agreements require using approved vendors and approved specifications, which protects brand consistency, but also removes the cost-negotiating flexibility an independent restaurant owner would have. Labor is where the fast food model reveals both its greatest structural advantage and its greatest ongoing risk, and it looks nothing like the labor structure of a full-service restaurant. The entire kitchen workflow is engineered for speed and simplicity. Standardized recipes, pre-portioned ingredients, and simplified cooking procedures that allow a largely entry-level, frequently part-time workforce to produce a consistent product without years of culinary training. This keeps the base wage bill lower than in a full-service restaurant, but it comes with a turnover rate that is notoriously among the highest of any industry, frequently exceeding 100% annually at many locations, meaning the average location effectively replaces its entire staff more than once over the course of a single year. Every departure means recruiting, onboarding, and training costs, along with a period of lower efficiency and higher error rates from newer staff still learning the standardized procedures. Labor typically consumes somewhere between 25 and 35% of revenue at a well-run location, and that percentage climbs quickly at any location that overstaffs to guard against no-shows or understaffs and suffers slower drive-through times that directly cost sales during the narrow, high-value lunch and dinner windows when speed is the entire value proposition being sold to the customer. This is where the business reveals the idea that actually explains almost everything else about how a fast food location survives or fails. And it has almost nothing to do with the quality of the food itself, because the recipes and standards are essentially fixed by the franchisor. It is drive-through speed, measured in seconds per car, and it functions as the single most important operational metric in the entire business. A location that can move cars through the drive-through in under 2.5 to 3 minutes during peak hours captures dramatically more revenue during that narrow window than a location running 4 or 5 minutes per car. Even though both locations might have an identical menu, identical pricing, and an identical number of parking spots, this is because the drive-through lane itself is a fixed, finite resource, exactly the way a limited number of vacuum stalls at a car wash or a capped number of gym floor spots is a fixed resource. And every second saved per car directly translates into another car served during the exact hour when demand is highest. Franchisors track this metric obsessively, often ranking every location in the system against each other on drive-through time, because it correlates more tightly with location-level profitability than almost any other single number available to them. A franchisee who understands this treats every operational decision, staffing schedules, kitchen layout, order-taking technology, through the lens of shaving seconds off that number, because those seconds, multiplied across hundreds of transactions a day and thousands across a year, are worth more to the bottom line than almost any other single lever available. Put all of this together and walk through what a plausible year looks like for a mid-size fast food franchise location. A well-positioned unit might serve somewhere between 300 and 800 transactions on an average day, with average ticket size typically landing between $8 and $14 once combo meals and add-ons are factored in. At the midpoint of that range, a single location can generate somewhere between $1.5 and $3 million in annual revenue, a number that sounds enormous compared to almost any independently owned restaurant covered in this kind of breakdown. But the cost structure eats into that number aggressively and in a specific, predictable order. Food and paper costs, the actual ingredients and packaging, typically run 28 to 33% of revenue, a figure franchisors monitor closely because it is tied directly to portion control and waste discipline at the store level. Labor runs another 25 to 35%. Royalty and advertising fund contributions take another 6 to 13% off the top, calculated on gross sales regardless of profitability. Rent or real estate costs, whether paid to the franchisor directly or a third-party landlord, commonly run another 6 to 10%. Add utilities, insurance, equipment maintenance, and credit card processing fees, and a well-run location often nets somewhere between 6 and 12% in operating margin, translating into an owner take-home that can range from a modest sum in a marginal single-unit operation to several $100,000 a year for an experienced multi-unit operator running several strong locations simultaneously. That last detail matters more in fast food franchising than in almost any other business format discussed in this kind of breakdown, because the real path to significant wealth in this industry is rarely a single restaurant. It is scale. The largest, most successful franchisees in almost every major fast food system operate not one location but dozens, sometimes over 100, because the fixed overhead of running a franchise organization, accounting, human resources, regional management, can be spread across many units, and because franchisors themselves actively favor and court experienced multi-unit operators when new territory becomes available, since a proven operator represents lower risk to the brand than a first-time single-unit owner. This creates a structural reality worth naming directly. The economics of owning one fast food franchise and the economics of owning 20 are not the same business at different sizes. They are genuinely different businesses, one built around personal, hands-on operation of a single site, the other built around professional multi-unit management, real estate portfolio strategy, and access to capital most first-time franchisees simply do not have. Scale changes the operator. It does not change the royalty. The timeline to profitability carries real risk of its own. A new location typically needs 6 to 18 months to build the kind of local awareness and repeat customer habit that produces stable, predictable daily transaction counts, and every month spent below that threshold draws down the working capital reserve set aside before opening. Capital that is already stretched thin by the size of the initial investment required just to open the doors. Franchise agreements also typically run for terms of 10 to 20 years, sometimes longer, with renewal often requiring a costly remodel to updated brand standards partway through the term, an expense many franchisees underestimate when they first sign the agreement and calculate their expected return over what they assume will be a simpler, lower-cost operating period. Termination and non-renewal risk deserves its own attention, because it is a category of risk almost entirely unique to the franchise structure compared to an independently owned restaurant. Franchise agreements typically include detailed performance and brand standard requirements, and a franchisor generally retains the right to terminate or decline to renew an agreement if a franchisee falls short of operational standards, cleanliness inspections, or minimum sales performance benchmarks over a sustained period. This means a franchisee can build a location's local reputation and customer base over years and still ultimately not fully control whether they retain the right to operate under that brand at that site indefinitely. A genuine risk that does not exist in the same form for someone who owns their restaurant's name and concept outright. There is also a supply chain dimension worth understanding, because unlike an independent restaurant that can shop for the best ingredient prices from any supplier, franchisees are typically required to purchase food, packaging, and often equipment exclusively from an approved list of vendors designated by the franchisor. This protects consistency across the system, since a customer expects the same product whether visiting a location across the country or across the street. But it also removes a lever independent restaurant owners have to control their own cost of goods when input prices rise. When a key commodity, beef, chicken, cooking oil, wheat, spikes in price nationally, an independent restaurant owner can adjust suppliers or portion sizes relatively quickly, while a franchisee is often locked into the approved supply chain and has to wait for centralized pricing adjustments or menu price increases approved at the system level. A delay that can compress margins meaningfully during periods of commodity inflation. Competition within the category has intensified significantly, and it looks different than the competition an independent restaurant faces. A fast food franchisee is not simply competing against other restaurants nearby. They are competing against every other location of every other major chain within the same trade area, all fighting over the same finite pool of daily transactions, using national promotional pricing and value menus as their primary competitive weapon, a race that can compress already thin margins further when nearby locations enter aggressive discounting periods, sometimes at the direction of the franchisor's own national marketing calendar rather than any decision. The local franchisee controls. Putting all of this together produces two genuinely different outcomes from what looks on the surface like the same recognizable building with the same recognizable sign. In the strong scenario, the site was selected with real discipline around traffic count and drive-through stacking capacity. Drive-through times consistently beat the system average. Labor scheduling matched the real hourly demand curve rather than a rough guess, and the operator either ran multiple locations to spread fixed overhead or ran a single location with exceptional operational discipline. Under those conditions, a location can reach the upper end of the profit range described earlier, and an experienced multi-unit operator running several such locations can build genuine, substantial wealth over a decade or more. In the realistic scenario, a handful of ordinary things go wrong that are not exotic at all. Drive-through times crept above the system average during a period of high staff turnover, and lost sales during peak hours went largely unnoticed until a quarterly review flagged it. A commodity price spike compressed food cost percentage for several consecutive quarters, while approved vendor pricing lagged behind the adjustment. A competing chain opened directly across the street, and both locations settled into a prolonged discounting war. Rent tied to a percentage of gross sales climbed automatically as revenue grew, without the corresponding profit growth an owner might expect from a flat rent structure. Under those conditions, that same location can slide from a comfortable operating margin into a thin single-digit one, even while the drive-through line still looks reasonably busy most days. The difference between those two outcomes across a multi-unit portfolio can be worth well over $1 million over the life of a franchise agreement, and almost none of that swing shows up as one dramatic event. It shows up as a few extra seconds per car in the drive-through, a slightly higher food cost percentage that never got renegotiated, and a slightly slower staff training cycle, compounding quietly, store by store, quarter after quarter, until the number at the bottom of the franchisee's consolidated spreadsheet looks nothing like the busy parking lot outside suggested it would. So, if someone is genuinely considering buying a fast food franchise, the lesson underneath all of this is the same one that shows up across nearly every royalty-based, brand-dependent business format. It was never really about how long the line stretches at lunch or how recognizable the sign is from the road. It is about whether the site, the drive-through speed, and the underlying royalty math can be run tightly enough, ideally across more than one location, to turn a percentage of gross sales that the parent company takes first, no matter how the month actually went, into a business that still leaves something meaningful behind for the person who signed the agreement.